Tom Campbell here. I and MBT Events hope you like this video. It was made possible by donations from our supporters. If you're one of them, thank you so very, very much. If you're new to MBT and find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. It would be very much appreciated. The links are in the description below. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Tom. We're going to do another session of Tom Campbell Answers Your Questions. We are getting some questions from various sources, from the contact forms, from some of our MBT community, and various places like that. So let me start off with Boulent's question. On the possibility of more than one data stream. In your theory of MBT, as far as I understand, our consciousness is connected to the data stream of a larger consciousness unit in order to evolve with love and harmony. As so many subsets of the LCS are to exist, it might be normal that we may be, as being the subjects, at different evolution levels, and therefore it may not be helpful for every individual to share the same one and only virtual reality data stream. So my question is, may there be a different virtual reality data stream in the LCS to satisfy the different levels of evolutionary needs of different individual consciousnesses? That's to say, are there different planes of evolution as VRs in the LCS? Thank you.
Okay. Now, the answer to that is absolutely. There is not one data stream for everybody in the simulation. Every single player in the simulation gets their own private, just for them data stream. Because, as you say, everyone is evolving differently, needs different challenges. That would not be very effective to have just one data stream. You'd have to, everybody would be treated exactly the same. But that individual data stream that everybody gets doesn't reduce to planes, as you said there at the right end. It doesn't reduce to planes of evolvement. It's not that. It's just that everybody gets a separate data stream. So if there's, let's say almost 9 billion of us now, then there's 9 billion different data streams. And if you have dogs and cats and horses and pigs and bumblebees and things, then all of they have a data stream as well. Anything that's conscious, which means something is aware and makes choices, then that consciousness gets their own independent data stream. I mean, look at The Sims or World of Warcraft. Every player in World of Warcraft gets their own data stream that shows what they're looking at, where they're going, how they're doing, how they're interacting with others. Everybody's not getting the same data stream. Now, there's things that are common. Everybody in World of Warcraft sees a tree growing in roughly the same spot. If you go to that part of the map, then a tree's growing there. Okay. But that's the only part that is common, is what's in that virtual reality universe. That's common. The stuff is common to those people who are all looking at the same place or hearing the same place or whatever, So a virtual reality couldn't have a tree in it for some people and there wasn't any tree there for the next people. That reality would be one that would keep changing based on the person. So yes, all the stuff, the background, the environment is stuff that the computer computes, and that's kind of standard for everybody. But each person's interaction, the choices they make and how those choices interact with other people, and then how other people, change their choices because of your choices, and all of that is very independent. And everybody gets to interpret their own data stream. So even if the same tree is in everyone's data stream who is looking at that spot on the map, people interpret that tree differently. People make different of it. Some people say, oh, that tree probably has a hidden gold up in the branches. I should climb it. Somebody else doesn't think that. I mean, everybody will interact with that tree in a different way. And somebody else say, oh, there's one of my enemies hiding behind that tree. I better check that out. So the tree will mean different things for different people, even though it's the same image. So you get a data stream that's unique and you interpret that data, which is also unique. So, but that doesn't create different planes of development. It's just a big virtual reality game where every player logs on and gets a data stream that describes the experience of their avatar.
All right, very good. Our next question is from Kaglar. Let's say there is a computer game which has countries in it. Days are passing one by one in the game, although the game tries to make it look like the days are passing simultaneously for all the countries. It does actually a trick to the player. In the process of passing a day, the game calculates all the countries one by one. Let's say first Russia, then England, then China. All the countries actually have priority numbers related to them, invisible to the player. For example, Russia has priority number 3 and England has 62. Russia is always calculated before England. If England and Russian troops are both moving to the same land and their arrival dates are both, say, 11 May, and the first arrival will get a defensive bonus, let's say, Russia will always arrive on that land first and get defensive bonus versus England. Why does it work like that? Because computers can calculate one thing at a time. Which led me thinking if the universe is a simulation, maybe there's a chance that the atoms are being calculated one by one. If we had devices to see if an atom is calculated before another atom, if we saw that the atoms are not being all updated at the same time, that could be unquestionable proof that the universe is a simulation.
Well, it doesn't actually work the way you're thinking. Uh, think of a simulation, which is a virtual reality, is a simulation, has an outer time loop. Every delta t that it moves forward, and that delta t is generally very, very small, depends on the resolution. But the extreme uh, delta t is like 10 to the minus 44 seconds, something like that, because it's called Planck time. And that's kind of as deep as our resolution is likely to go. Now, we can have less resolution than that, but that's unlikely we'll have better resolution than that. So in any case, every delta t, everything is calculated. So if delta t is 10 to the minus 44 seconds, you can see a whole lot of delta t's go by before even, the wind wiggles this hair on your head. Every 10 to the minus 44 seconds, everything everywhere on the whole map is calculated. So it doesn't matter if 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 two sides are moving toward the same point, they arrive there at the same time, plus or minus 10 to the minus 44 seconds. Well, we don't have any appreciation for 10 to the minus 44 seconds. That, to us, that's something we can't differentiate. We can't even measure that. That's too small for us to measure. So we would see that they would arrive simultaneously. The fact that one might be computed earlier than another, and there might be a delta t difference between them, is totally insignificant and means nothing, unmeasurable, unnoticeable. They would seem to, arrive at the same time if they were equal distances and moving at the same speed. So this calculation is done one at a time in the sense that that's the way computers work. They go through the entire map and one thing at a time, they calculate. But it's all done within that delta t. You see, there's not some parts that are going forward where other parts are being calculated. The whole map gets updated with this delta t. Now it's the next delta t, and the whole map and every player and everything going on gets updated for the next delta t, and so on. So every delta t, everything gets computed. So you'll never be, depends on where you are in the execution loop, you can never be more than a delta t, different. If you're have two consecutive events delta t wise. They can be no more than a 10 to the minus 44 seconds difference, which is no time at all. Like I say, that's totally beyond our ability to even measure that.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Joshua. My father passed away recently. Not long after he passed, I decided to check up on him and managed to find him during an out-of-body experience. He seemed to be at peace and quite happy and much younger looking than I remember, but I couldn't maintain the OBE for long enough to actually exchange words with him. Over the next few months, a lot of strange occurrences, well beyond coincidence, started happening that indicated he was trying to reach me. I went out of body to find him again, and I was successful. But what I found was that he was quite sober this time. I asked him if he knew he was dead, to which he said, of course, and he proceeded to tell me he didn't know why he was still here, only that he had a lesson to learn but couldn't figure out what it was. He also told me he was surprised that some random people were actually able to see him, and then gave me a series of downloads showing he was wandering around the area where his parents used to live and even what two of the people who saw him looked like, which is something I will try to validate later when I return to the area. At this point, I could not maintain the out of body, and my focus returned to my physical body. What could be going on that has him stuck here? If there is indeed a lesson he needs to work through to move on, how can I help him figure it out?
We all have to learn our own lessons, and we all have to figure it out on our own. And so I think there's probably nothing you can do to help him figure it out other than just interacting with him. Just talking, interacting. Sometimes just casual conversation will help somebody get a better, insight to how to solve a problem. But what is happening, it's not so much that he is here, that he can't go on and that he's coming back here and he's somehow stuck. That would not be the case. It may seem like that to him. Think of it in other terms. If the system believes that he has some learning that would happen, that if he got the aha moment and put the pieces together, he could learn a bunch from the past incarnation. And all he needs to do is put those pieces together. Then the system may give him that data stream. In other words, may give him an out of body, if you like. An out of body is just a single player game. It's you and the LCS. So the LCS could give your dad at that point, even though he's not here. That doesn't make any difference. He's still an I-who-OC. He still exists there as consciousness. Could give him an out of body, a data stream that would help him put those pieces together so that he could maximize his learning from the last thing. So that's about the only thing I could think of. So he's not really here and he's not really stuck. He's just having to figure some things out. Now, if he doesn't figure them out, well, then they'll just let it go and they'll go on and he'll have another experience and he'll get another chance to figure those things out. But if he was really close to getting an aha moment and figuring it out, then it's worth it to the system to help him make those connections. Sort of like the times when you have the life, your life you've lived, you relive it and you see all the things, a lot of the mistakes you've made and the things you did in order to help you learn something from those experiences. That's the whole point of the life review. It's not to get you or rub your nose in your mistakes or something. It's there just to help you learn from your past experience. So the system is willing to do that if it thinks that's a good possibility. Not everybody gets a life review. It's just not applicable to some people, but it is to others. So not everybody gets what your father's got, but evidently it's applicable to him. But that's why I say there's nothing particularly that you can do. He has to figure it out. It's his experience. You can be a friend, you can talk to him with it. That's sometimes helpful, but he is not lost or dysfunctional. He's not in a bad situation at all. that's not the point. He's not stuck. There isn't any, he doesn't need to be saved or helped. Just be a friend like any other friend you have that's trying to solve a problem.
Thank you. Interesting. Another question he has, how do some anti-rats, this is mentioned in your book, get to very high levels of personal power that can make them quite dangerous if the LCS is being unsupportive or even actively running interference?
Anti-rats, that is people who are evolving negatively. They're actually de-evolving, which is de-evolving is what I call evolving negatively. They can gain some power just by practicing, dedicating themselves to learning things that allow them to bully or hurt other people. So they can get to where they seem powerful to the people around them that really don't know anything. They seem like they're really powerful. But in the bigger picture, they're not all that powerful to somebody who's been evolving on the positive side. So the way that works is by practicing and learning and focusing, they may get good at modifying future probability or things like that just because they practice it and they'll get good at it. And they have their ego under control to the point that the ego is subordinated to their focus on practice and practice. See, so the ego doesn't interrupt them that much. So that's how they manage to get better at it. But they can only grow so much. Their ego and their fear that you have when you de-evolve will prevent them from getting really powerful. Now, relative to people who know nothing, they seem really powerful, but they're actually not all that powerful. If you evolve on the positive side, there is no limitation. You don't have that fear and ego limiting you, so you can evolve and much more, gain much more power than you can on the negative side. So it's allowed because everybody has free will. If you have free will, then you can de-evolve if you want to. You can be nasty if you want to. It's de-evolutionary, but the system has to allow everyone to make their own choices. And if they make poor choices, that has to be allowed. Otherwise, it was, look, everybody has free will as long as you do what I want. Well, that's not free will. That's a very limited set of choices. So that's why it's free will says that you can de-evolve if you want to. You can de-evolve if you put enough focus on it to get your ego and your fear and your beliefs under control, but you'll never really be very powerful in the big picture, though you may seem to be very powerful in the little picture. Now, most of those people eventually cause themselves to crash and burn. They're only powerful and nasty for a while, and because of what they end up self-destructing. And then when they self-destruct, they have another opportunity to try to turn that around and go forward. And the system will put them in a situation where it's more likely they will succeed in evolving positively. So that's, now they may still decide that they like the negative side and they're going to work harder at it. Well, they're just digging themselves a deeper hole. Eventually, they're going to have to turn around and start going the other way. Otherwise, they will just self-destruct and self-destruct and self-destruct, and they'll see the light eventually that this is not working out, and that the power that they're getting is not a power that's worth anything. It has no value in the long run. Only apparently has value in the short run.
The positive way and love is unlimited and moves
Yes.
forward because that's the
Mm-hmm.
nature of our system.
Yes.
All right, thank you, Tom. The third question, love is a great feeling, but how would you define the operation of love from the perspective of scientific theory? For instance, you often say we should become or move towards love. Is this simply a more philosophically digestible way of saying the parts of the system work most efficiently when they're cooperating with and assisting each other?
It's all tied together. Yes, indeed. Um, love is rational. We talk about love, and people think, oh, when you're in love, you're irrational. But that's not the case. Love is rational. Love is about other. It's how can I help? What can I do? How can I be of service? It's all about other people. Now, if you fall in love, but you're not really falling in love, you're falling in need, and it is all about you and getting your needs met, you see, then that can be irrational because that's based on fear, and fear is always irrational, and love is always rational. Love is always in the positive direction, and fear is always in the negative direction. So, yes, it's just the nature of our consciousness system. And it has that nature because it's an information system. The basic nature of an information system, one that can evolve itself, let's say, is that it lowers its entropy. In a social system, lowering entropy means everybody cooperates and works together because that is low entropy rather than the opposite, where people don't cooperate and everybody's out for themselves. You see, so it's just the nature of our system. So, yes, as we grow toward love, we're growing toward optimizing the world for everybody. That's that's where we're going. It's not just about us. It's us optimizing this universe of ours, this world for everyone. Everyone wins. You're making choices that are win, win, win for everyone. That's a choice toward love, caring, cooperation. You know, I guess we do a whole list of those sorts of things, but it's all the positive things where you help, and the whole is better because of the choices that you make, and it's based on long term. Is that the whole is better in the long term? It's not like you can do something and well that lowers entropy for just a little while and then it really raises a whole lot. That's not it. You have to do things that lower entropy in the long term. Over time, the entropy is raised, and sometimes that means you may actually raise entropy just a little bit in the process of lowering it. I mean, it just depends on what you're doing and how you're doing it. But in order for it to be evolving toward love, the long-term entropy has to decrease. Your contribution to the system entropy has to be one that decreases. Yeah. So yes, you're right. It's all part of the same thing. Optimizing the system, optimizing our personal experience so that we're happier and fulfilled and really having a good time here. So it optimizes our relationships. It basically optimizes everything.
Thank you for answering that. Next question comes from Matthias. I have questions about probability distributions and random draws in MBT. Where and when are the probability distributions calculated? Are they calculated by the LCS at every delta t, or do they automatically and continuously fall out the VR rule set at every delta t and are just stored in probable future databases for the case they are needed?
I'm not sure the difference is there between those two things. Yes, they're calculated every delta t, and the system assesses the state of things, like the state vector of the whole system, and it assesses everything by individual. So we have an individual has an entropy level, the system has an entropy level, and there are possibilities that each of us have. We have a decision space. The decision space is all those possible choices that we have. We could do this, we could do that, we could do another thing. That's our decision space. All of those are possibilities. And with each of those possibilities, the system assigns a probability. And it assigns that probability based on the choices we've made in the past. So this is maybe our 10,000th incarnation. We've made an awful lot of choices in 10,000 lifetimes. And the system's pretty good about guessing what choice we'll make next. It would understand us pretty well. So it puts out probabilities of each of those choices has a probability. Now, if there's a choice that is 1 in 100 million, it might just neglect that choice as being insignificant. So every choice isn't necessarily made, but all the ones that have enough probability to be in play. Okay, so that's another choice the system has, is where it puts those boundaries. So it does that for everyone. And you have this then probable future database. That's all the things that could possibly happen and the probability that they will happen. Now, if I'm, not as predictable as others, perhaps, and I do something, wild hair, do something that I've never done before, well, then the system has to recalculate because I didn't choose, the way they thought. They changed the probabilities. So now it has to go back and say, well, we thought he was going to choose this, but he didn't. He chose that. So now that changes everything because once you make a choice, all the probabilities shift. Because if you didn't do this and you're doing that instead, then the probabilities are going to be different than if you did this. Now, if I marry Susie instead of Jane, that makes a big difference for a lot of people. It makes a difference for me, but it makes a difference for Susie. It makes a difference for Jane. It makes a difference for my family, their families, all their friends, anybody that's interacting with those three people, that choice affects them. You see, so it has to look at all those interactions, all those possibilities, and you think, yes, there's a lot of them. But on the other hand, this is a big computer and it's good at doing a lot of things very quickly. That's what computers are good at. So it's able to keep up and estimate what it thinks we're going to do, future probability. It has to fix those if we do something different. So I'd guess probably 80, 90% of the time, it probably gets it right. There's a lot of things that it always gets right, like a rock's rolling downhill. It's going to continue to roll downhill until it gets to the bottom of the hill, the next delta t. That's pretty clear. So those sorts of probabilities, then it's just a probability of whether it'll actually hit another rock and bounce to the left or bounce to the right or other things it might do. And those are also in probability. So that's how the future probable database is computed. That's why it's computed. That's the database that the Hindus call the Akashic records. It's the database of all the possible things. This is the database, and that you can change probabilities so that as things happen, the probabilities change. So we make choices, but besides that, the probabilities that are there, will modify according to our intent. So that's how we heal. That's how we, have a placebo effect. Intent modifies future probability. Future probability just means things are more likely to happen than not. So if you put a lot of effort into it being sunny because you want to have a picnic, then what that does is modifies, say, the how much moisture's in the air. It modifies, various parameters to make that happen because you change the probabilities. So now when the system is going to calculate, is it going to rain or not, and it goes into the probability distribution and pulls a random draw from the is it going to rain or is it not going to rain? Well, now you've changed the probability and it's more likely to not rain. So that's how those things work. So I hope I've answered his question. I wasn't quite sure. It sounded like he just phrased the same question two ways. I wasn't really sure what he thought the difference was, but hopefully that explanation will solve his problem.
All right, thank you. The next question is, how is it that a probabilistic simulation is more efficient than a deterministic one when there are also practically infinite possibilities of every detail happening? If the LCS has to compute every probability from the most probable event to the 10th to the 100th to the 1000th most probable event of everything that might be happening up front, then there is practically no end to this. For example, if I open a box that hasn't been opened for 500 years, then the LCS has to compute the possibility that I find a golden coin with one scratch on the right side. Then it has to compute the possibility I find a golden coin with two scratches on the left side. Then it has to compute I find a silver coin with 17 dark spots in the middle, and so on and so on. That wouldn't be manageable. How does the LCS cap this process?
Well, one of the things you're missing is that that box that you found that was nobody knows what's in it. The LCS probably knows what's in it. That box came from someplace. Somebody created that box. Somebody acquired that box. Somebody did or did not put things into that box. It's been, under the ground. It's been, someplace, in an attic. It's been someplace all this time. But the system knows about that box and knows what's in it. So everything that's unknown, the system has to do a random draw from the probability distribution. But there's a whole lot of things that are not unknown. They're unknown to us, but they're not unknown to the larger consciousness system. So it isn't guessing as much as we're guessing. Okay, so that's one thing. Two, we are pretty easy to judge, what as far as our personal, you know, future probabilities of what we're doing and the choices we're going to make. We're pretty easy to guess, so it gets that mostly right as well. So if it gets all the stuff right, because all that virtual stuff has been made or stored or something somewhere, and it's got that in its records, then it doesn't have to guess. It knows what's in that box. Now, if it wants to put something else there, so let's say, you happen to find this box, but you also happen to be a very highly evolved person that if you just had some extra money, you could help some orphan get an operation they needed. Well, it might just add some money to that box for you to do that. You see, it could do that because nobody knows what's in it. So it can manipulate without any notice that anything has been manipulated within uncertainty. So it has that option that it can do as well. So it's not as big a problem as you think. Now, the second thing is the reason that using probability distributions to decide what's going to happen is so much more efficient is because you only need to do some of these create the probability distributions one time. And then you may have a little variations of it. So you've probably heard me give the idea of the very simplest machine I can think of as a cannon. It's just really simple. It's a cylinder, with a bore in it. You put a ball in it, and then you put an explosive behind it. And when an explosive goes boom, the ball gets pushed out. So it's a very, very simple machine. And this is a virtual cannon, which means the system has made this cannon. It makes this cannon picture of it for us. We're virtual characters in a virtual world. So it's intimately connected to this cannon, to its materials, to where the materials came from how it was done, how it was put together, because all of that was done in a virtual reality. All of that the system computed. So it knows everything about that cannon. And it can do a little simulation on the side that fires, say, 100,000 rounds through that cannon in a zillionth of a microsecond, and get the distribution of that particular cannon, the probability distribution, where they would fall. That's called the dispersion in ballistics. It's the ballistic dispersion. You fire a cannon 10 times and all 10 balls don't land on top of each other. They get dispersed because of the variations that are there, the variations in powder burn, the variations in how the barrel warps, the variations in lots of things. Will throw that ball out a little different. So he does the probability distribution. Now, you have a war going on, and there's 50,000 cannons out there shooting at each other. Well, that means when a cannon goes, instead of doing impossible calculations from subatomic particles to atomic particles to molecules to build up the cannon and all of the powder and all the molecules in the powder and how the fire, that is a deterministic That's impossible. It'd probably take our biggest, supercomputer, a day just to compute 3 seconds worth of cannonball fire. So it's too hard. But now the system just has to say, all right, there's 50,000 cannons out there. This one fired, random draw. That's where that one lays. Next one fires and random draw. That's where that one is. The computations become trivial almost. So because the system has created everything in the system in the virtual reality, the computer, the LCS has created everything in the virtual reality and is indeed completely familiar with every detail of it. And because it has the rule set, it's its rule set. So it knows all the physics, all the rules, all the chemistry, and how those things will work. It understands all that. So it can make little models, create probability distributions. And now let's say, okay, as cannons fire shells, they get hot. And as they get hot, their barrel flexes more, and that changes the dispersion. So now they just need a dispersion that changes itself based on how many shells have been fired. And maybe there's a retrofit on that cannon where somebody puts a stainless steel sleeve in it because it was just made of cast iron and steel is better. And it can just do a little calculation and then it can put that in it. It doesn't have to change the whole model. It can just update its models. So an awful lot of its models are reusable. It can just change little bits, pieces here and there as it needs them. And because it's been doing this, it's been making little models and creating probability distributions for so long, it's almost done everything. Everything that happens here, it's very familiar with the statistics involved in that thing happening. All it has to do is make a few adjustments to take in consideration for unique details, and it's done. And that is so much easier than starting to calculate where all the molecules are and what each molecule is doing all the time. That's impossible, even for something that's simple. So that's why the probability distributions are simpler. They're reusable. They are easy to make because the system has every parameter necessary because it's the logic of the virtual reality that's caused it, right? Joe and Harry went to make a cannon and they poured the form for for the cylinder and they know Joe and Harry and they know exactly how they poured it and they know all the details because that's a virtual reality. It's a virtual Joe and a virtual Harry and virtual iron and virtual mold. All of that is just computed by the larger conscious system. So it's got all the data, create decent probability distributions for everything. And mostly it's done this for so long, it's just an object, a cannon object off the shelf. Fiddle with it a little bit, and now it's suitable for, a modern cannon. They don't have to go back and redo everything. But if they did have to go back and recreate a distribution, it would be trivial for them. Remember also that the larger consciousness system has about 1 billion cycles worth of computing power for every one of our cycles. So between our delta t's, it's got 1 billion cycles, delta t's of its own to do all kinds of things. It's much faster than we are here. So in its mind, our virtual reality is taking place in super slow motion. It doesn't have any trouble at all keeping up with what's going on. And if you see, if you did everything from the ground up, you had to calculate every atom and every electron and every molecule and what happens and how does the powder burn and how does the heat transfer through the inconsistencies in the iron because the iron isn't perfectly homogeneous and you've got a horrible problem. And every time any cannon anywhere fires, you have to calculate that whole process again. It's not like you can skip to the end like you do if it's statistical. Every single time some cannon is fired anywhere, you start with elementary particles and you have to build that up and decide where it goes, and that's ridiculous. It's just, so the difference between a bottom up, detailed, materialistic viewpoint it's so horrendously inefficient as to just be impossible. Whereas for a probability distribution model, it's not only not impossible, but it's probably hundreds of thousands of times less trouble, more efficient, faster. And it's very accurate because these probability distributions are not guessed at. We know them exactly because the system has modeled the world, has modeled the virtual reality. So they're known precisely how the statistics will work. And it just needs some variables. Oh, what are the wind conditions? What's the humidity? What's the temperature of the air? How many times has this cannon been fired? But it can keep track with those little details. That's small. Now it has a small collection of details, and bing, it gets a problem. Instead of billions and billions of calculations, try to figure out every time some cannon somewhere is fired, billions and billions of calculations to it's not even billions and billions, it's quadrillions and whatever, just immense. Like I say, a supercomputer probably cannot fire a cannonball in real time. It's just too much. If it were going to do it from elementary particles up, it just can't do that. So mostly when people make simulations, they try to make them as deterministic as possible. But when it gets to the point that it just doesn't make any sense, then they'll throw statistics in there to say, oh, here's how the powder burns. We'll give a statistical solution to a powder burn, but then we'll calculate other things. That's to make it tractable, because if they don't do that, so most models really are not deterministic entirely. Most of them are some deterministic, and they use probability and probability distributions whenever the calculations are too hard to do, deterministically. So that's kind of how that works. So there's this huge difference in the efficiency of a model run on probability with this system.
Well, thank you. Following that question, how does the LCS make a real random draw? As far as I know, there's no mathematical function that can produce real randomness, only pseudo-randomness. Because mathematics is deterministic, is it possible to compute real randomness? Thus, real random number generators include also physical input data, for example, from a live camera scene of nature, but the LCS cannot do that because it has to compute the VR itself. So how does the LCS make random draws and be sure it doesn't know the outcome up front? Otherwise, it wouldn't be probabilistic anymore. Is this similar to giving something free will? Or what would be your best guess to that?
No, it doesn't really matter whether it's truly random or not truly random. It's really irrelevant. Look at it this way: we have random events like the atomic decay of a radioactive particle. Now that would be called, you can make that your random number generator, and they call that an event-based random number generator, as opposed to a computed random number generator. Well, that event-based thing, if you look at the way particles fly out of a radioactive element, that's being modeled by the LCS. That's modeled in a computer. Everything that we say is completely random because it's just a random part of nature, like a particle decay. All of that is computed. The whole virtual reality is computed. It doesn't matter. You need a good random number generator, and it's not that hard to compute one that's really, really very good. Now, if it draws out something and the probability, is not random, who notices? Who says, oh, that particle shouldn't have come out of that radioactive element. It should have come out later or on this side. Nobody knows. It just happens, right? So whether it's random or computed is really irrelevant. It just has to work. It just has to work. The computed ones have to be good enough that there are not noticeable biases in it, that there's not noticeable repetitions in it. And if you're the larger consciousness system configured as a computer, you can make really good random number generators that fit the bill and are not a problem at all. So those event-based random generators are really computed to begin with. The whole reality is computed, and it doesn't matter really whether it's perfectly random or not. The system works just as well. It only would be a problem if somebody could look at it and say, "Oh, well, this shouldn't be like this." And I suspect if the system was aware that that was a possible problem, it would solve that problem before it even got there. It would do something differently. So not a problem, not an issue. Pseudo random is good enough.
The next question we have is about entropy, because it's a fundamental thing in your theory. As I understand MBT, the second law of thermodynamics is just a part of the rule set here in this virtual reality. Like any other physics law, such as mass attracts mass or radiation travels with the speed of light. So that's all rule set stuff. And in consciousness, nothing of these things really exist, obviously. No mass, no radiation, nothing but consciousness exists. So the big question for me is then, why of all the things does the second law of thermodynamics then also apply in consciousness? You can always say if we don't put energy into evolve, we de-evolve. We just have to put constant effort in to keep the entropy low. But I thought that's just rule set stuff from the VR. Why does this law suddenly apply in consciousness where there is no rule set?
Well, consciousness itself has some of its own rules, not like our rule set, but it has some of its own rules. And some of those rules are just, rational, the way things need to be. If you want a stable function, then there's certain things that stable function has to have. It can't just, all the pieces and parts of the function just can't go on their own way doing random things. That won't make a stable function. So if you want something stable, like a consciousness system, then there has to be some stability. There has to be some basic rules. Now, the idea that you need to make some effort to lower entropy is just, it's one of those things that, of course, it's not that the second law of thermodynamics applies to consciousness. It's just the basis of that second law of thermodynamics is so fundamental. It's just fundamental to existence. So it applies to our virtual reality. It applies to consciousness. It applies to everything, because that's just the nature of stuff. Is that if or systems or whatever, if you don't put any energy in, then you don't get anything out. Otherwise you have a static universe. You have determinism. Everything just is. You don't have any entropy. You don't have any second law. You don't have anything, because nothing ever happens. Everything is determined, predetermined. So there are no rules. You don't need any rules or any laws or anything else. That's why it's such a zero system. It doesn't have any piece parts. It just doesn't have anything that works. So if you're going to have real systems that do things, that interact, that move, that change, then there's a few basic rules at how that change has to work. Otherwise, it isn't stable. Anything can't be stable. So if you have something like consciousness, it's a stable system. It has emission, that's to lower its entropy. It has a means to do that, which is the process of creating information and applying it and using it to its advantage. So that's just a natural part of existence. So it's not that the second law of thermodynamics applies to consciousness, it applies to everything. It's rational stuff, systems that have to coordinate, that have to hang together, that have to, continue, that have to evolve. They can't do that if everything is flying off in opposite directions. So there's some rules. Everything can't do that. But it's not like a rule set that somebody says, here's the rules of stuff. It's just that is basic logic. if you don't have things that can cooperate or care or create something better, then you're stuck. So you need to have ways of making reality useful, not chaotic. And that requires some rules. And those rules are just fundamentally apply to everything, not just second law of thermodynamics, but consciousness and anything else. So it's, you might call it a cosmic law, and everything has to apply to that, because otherwise you couldn't have stability. You couldn't have progress. You couldn't have growth. That something has to build on something else. And things don't build unless you put effort into it. Things just don't build with no effort. If you build something, it has to, if you have a system and that system's only stays alive for a couple of milliseconds and it disappears, and another one and it disappears, and so on, it doesn't ever amount to anything. For something to be stable and build upon itself and evolve and change itself, then there are a few basic rules that you have to apply to that. So yeah, cosmic rules, I guess, is the best way to say it. It's necessary for things to change and evolve and become something.
Right, that makes sense. Um, Following that question, I wonder, therefore, how did you come to the conclusion for yourself that entropy always raises by itself in consciousness space too? Did you observe it there? And if so, wouldn't that be an evidence or indicator that there is a more powerful thing or environment around consciousness if something can put entropy pressure on consciousness?
No, I don't think it means there's something else that can put entropy pressure. That doesn't have to come from the outside. That can just come from the inside. Again, it's one of those cosmic rules that you just have to have if you're going to have something that pulls together and makes something of itself, something that lasts, something that can grow, something that can evolve. So, no, that doesn't mean there's an outside force that puts pressure. It's an internal force. The consciousness could, you heard me say that if you start with all random bits and then you order those bits, then your entropy goes down. Well, if you never order any bits, if you all have random bits and you always have random bits, then what do you have? Nothing. You see, you don't have anything that can grow or be or become. So if you want something that can exist and grow, then you'll have to have some rules that'll say, well, order has to be achieved such that it's stable and it can grow and evolve and become something else. And when you have that, then that takes effort. It takes will. You have to decide, I want to make a pattern out of these ones and zeros. I don't want them all to be random. I want these to be like this. Okay, that takes effort. It takes awareness. It takes energy to do that, to make that pattern and keep that pattern. It takes memory. You have a lot of things there. And if you don't have that, then nothing can really exist. All you have is randomness and randomness and randomness, and nothing ever comes of it. So, in order for things to exist, it's not that an outside force imposes entropy on it. It's just naturally that's the way things have to work. There has to be some way that order can be increased as a function of experience. That means you can grow, you can evolve. And once you have that, now everything else kind of takes care of itself. All you need is the initial conditions, in the rule set, and you can let things go. But you can't do that if all the bits are random and they stay that way. So the idea that entropy is a function of consciousness, it just means that with highest entropy, all the digits are random. You can't have anything. Nothing. Nothing exists. There is no information. There's nothing at all. So then you get nothingness. So that's where the entropy comes from. It's just required for something to grow and evolve. It's not an external thing that's imposed from above. And it not only applies to consciousness, but it applies to the virtual reality that we create. And why does it? Because the virtual reality is based on rules. If you had a virtual reality and everything happened randomly, well, it would never amount to anything. Here's a virtual reality and all the actions are random. All the players make random choices. Well, a random choice really isn't a choice. I wouldn't even define that as a choice. So nothing would happen. So again, in our virtual reality, so that you have a virtual reality where entities can grow and make choices and it can develop, it can evolve, then you have to have some rules that in order to do that, effort has to be made. And if you don't make effort, things tend to backslide. Things tend to come apart. People tend to forget. And I did learn that through experience. And I've talked several places about the done reality where people went when they were done. They thought they had evolved, they were the pinnacle, they were enlightened, and they didn't need any more opportunities to evolve and make choices. They were done. And as it turns out, in that reality, those who hung out in the done reality started to become undone. They started to form cliques. Their egos started to grow. They created beliefs in their superiority. Those things happened. And when they realized it, well, they got out of the done reality. They realized that is not a good place, that you always have to be engaged. Because if you don't make choices, if you don't make meaningful choices, you your capacity to make those choices diminishes. It's a use it or lose it. That's another one of those cosmic rules, I suspect. If you don't make any choices at all, you just sit there and do nothing, well, eventually your ability to make choices starts to decrease. Even if in the beginning you had thousands of choices, a long time later, you don't really remember any of them. You don't really have any choices. It just kind of goes away. So some basic things that lead to stable configurations and things that can build on themselves require things like entropy, that energy has to be put in to create something new, something bigger, something lower entropy. And that if you don't put in effort, it tends to fall apart. It just goes away eventually, maybe not quickly, but goes away eventually. Well, let's say that, we had all the people on earth decide that they're done with education and they don't want to learn anything. So instead of going out and putting effort into learning, everybody just sits and watches sitcoms on TV, and that's all they do. Nobody learns anything. So language is back to grunt and gesture. Nobody knows really anything. Nobody knows anything about life or science or anything like that. Well, all it would take is be like a generation or two of that, and you wouldn't have the capability to do any of that stuff anymore. You'd lose it. You'd have to start over. You'd have to start back at caveman levels and start to regrow that. That's just the nature of things. If you don't exercise, your muscles get weak. If you don't think, your mind gets weak. It Again, it's just kind of a part of reality that you have to constantly be making effort. Otherwise, things tend to disappear with lack of effort, lack of attention, lack of mind being applied to them. So that's the way it is. And you constantly want to evolve, which means you constantly want to change yourself. So constant evolution requires constant effort. If you say, I'm done, I'm already perfect, well, that right away tells you you're not perfect, because if you were perfect, you'd never say that you were perfect. You'd realize there was always more to learn, always new experiences that you could have. So the idea that if you see that you don't have to do anything is just kind of an irrational idea. Of course you have to do things. Maintenance is required for everything. Nothing just is forever. Even a block of steel eventually will evaporate. It has a vapor pressure just like everything else. Eventually you wait long enough, that block of steel will just disappear into thin air. Just like an ice cube. You take an ice cube and you let it sit in your freezer long enough, it'll just disappear. It sublimates. It goes right from a solid to a gas. Well, so will a block of steel. Sublimate, go right from a solid to a gas. It takes a long time. It may be trillions of years or trillions of years. I don't know, but everything has a vapor pressure. There's constantly little molecules of substance that fly off. They get enough energy that they can escape. And that's called vapor pressure. So it's just the nature of things that they unwind with time if they don't put any effort in keeping themselves wound up.
How is that vapor pressure different from the second law of thermodynamics?
They're similar. They're similar in the sense that they're talking somewhat about the same thing. The second law of thermodynamics just says that the only way, if you could keep entropy the same, your entropy wouldn't decrease. If you could just keep it constant, all the processes would have to be reversible processes. That means all processes could run forward or backward, and that would be fine. But almost all natural processes are not reversible. If you let your ice cube go into vapor, you can't just make all the vapor create your ice cube again. It's irreversible. And because of that, you can't just get it to come back without a loss of energy. So they're related, but they're not the same. The second law of thermodynamics just says that the entropy of the universe must, if no outside energy is put in, the entropy of the universe must always either stay the same, that's if all processes are reversible, or it must increase. Entropy increases naturally. Now, if you had a system that was entirely reversible, then the system could always go back to where it started. It could change and it could always come back. And in that case, all the processes are reversible, then entropy could stay at zero. But natural systems don't tend to work that way. Natural systems tend to change in ways that are not reversible. So the actual second law says the entropy of the universe either stays the same or increases. And the stays the same doesn't actually happen in our world, but there are systems that you could make that are reversible that you could do that with at least to some approximation. So that's the second law of thermodynamics. Basically, in less mathematical terms, it just means everything, if you don't put energy into it, runs down. Everything goes away. Everything has a shelf life. Nothing just stays the way it is without effort, without putting energy in. Everything requires maintenance. So that's the whole thing that leads to the fact that the universe will eventually just be a sea of elementary particles. Probably hydrogen atoms and light and photons and stuff flying around, and that'll be it, because that's kind of the low energy state. And then even that eventually, I guess, would disappear and you have nothing. So that's the idea. Suns grow old and they explode. But hey, we make new suns. There are sun factories going on in the universe too. So parts of things can be lowering entropy while other parts are increasing entropy, within a system. But it says that in the sum, if you look over all the stuff in the system, some parts are lowering entropy, some parts are raising. If you look over everything in the system, entropy will always increase. So you look at a seed, and a seed turns into a tree or a flower. Well, that's a big decrease in entropy. Or a fetus turns into a human being, or a monkey, or a dog, or something. That's growing a lot of capability, and a lot of order is being done there. So that is lowering entropy, creating more order. But for as much as that's going on, there's also decay and death and things coming apart. And the second law basically says things will come apart more than the entropy will rise rather than lower if you don't do any work, if you don't put any energy into the system. So that's what the second law is, and it just makes common sense. Things need maintenance. Everything loses its ability to do work if you don't, you know, provide maintenance or put energy into it. Even a block of steel will disappear if you wait long enough.
All right, thank you. The next question is also from Matthias. I have a question about the nature of love. You always say love is about other, not about oneself. Otherwise, it's not love. But if every consciousness that exists is just a part of the same system, the LCS, then there is no other. In total, there is just the LCS. So if an IUOC loves another IUOC, it's basically just a part of the LCS loving another part of itself. So everything that exists then is the LCS loving itself. Wouldn't that logically mean that love doesn't exist because self-love is not real love? Maybe one can say it is only love as long as the IUOCs or free will awareness units don't know that they are all part of the same thing. They are only capable of real love as long as they think they are complete separate entities that have nothing to do with each other. You often say the LCS wants us to succeed in lowering entropy because our success is its success. Isn't that just a selfish goal then that has nothing to do with love? What am I missing here? Can you please bring a little more light to that topic?
Okay. Well, that was the reasons he brings up here are the reasons that the larger conscious system, when it was a monolithic thing, realized that it had to break itself into pieces. That having all those pieces then increased the possibilities. So, yes, as one monolithic thing, it could love itself, it could love the things it did. It was very limited. Therefore, what it could become and how it could grow was very limited. So it made independent pieces of itself. And I mean independent in the sense they're still pieces of it, but they have free will. They could cooperate or not cooperate. They have free will. Now, when you have two things with free will, they can like each other or they can dislike each other. They can cooperate or they can fight. They have that ability to do that. That's why creating the IUOCs raised the possibilities of things that could happen. Now you had all these interactions between, chunks of free will. They could do all sorts of things. They could cooperate and build something really fantastic, or they could all fight and create something very violent. They could do whatever they wanted. But the potential grew. Before, you just had one monolithic thing, and its potential was limited. So now you have millions of individual units of consciousness, and what they could do together is a much lower entropy configuration than what one thing could do. Because now you have to have these millions of IUOCs learning, evolving to the point that they can cooperate with each other and help each other out, which isn't where you start. That's where you try to go. It's where you try to end. It's not where you start. So it gives them opportunity to make choices that are choices of caring, choices of sharing, choices, that express love, express other, instead of just what's in it for me. How can I get mine? How can I, use you? It's about other people. So that's the low entropy path, because that optimizes social arrangements. Everything works better in a society if everybody is positive and works to the benefit of everybody else. So that's why, yes, there is love. Love does exist, and yes, it all returns to one thing, and that's the conscious system. But that thing is not a monolithic thing anymore. It's got lots and lots of piece parts that have its own free will and can choose to be ugly or choose to be nice. Their choice. And the potential that they can all do together is much more, it's enormous compared to the potential it had as one monolithic thing. So, cells did the same thing, right? They split and become multi-celled things, and then things with organs, and then things with multiple organs, and as all that lowering of entropy, you know, creating more information, creating order, then you ended up with a body like ours with many trillions of cells all cooperating with each other, and we are more generalized. We can do lots of different things. We have a very large decision space, all the things that we can do. When you're just in a chat room chatting with people, your decision space is much smaller. So all the increase in decision space is an increase in potential. So yes, love is a real thing, and it's how the uh, the individuated units with free will can interact with each other. They can interact with love, or they can interact with distrust and fear and that sort of thing. So love's a real thing, and its opportunity to love was created when you created a social system where individuated units, each with its free will, had a choice to how they were going to interact. That gives the opportunity for love to be expressed. Whereas when you have one monolithic thing, the opportunity for love to be expressed is pretty minimal. There's not much there. Possibilities are small. So love is a real thing, even though it's all one system. But that one system is not in charge of everything. If there was no free will and that one system just had 8 billion pieces of itself doing whatever it said them for them to do, and they didn't have independent free will, then yes, the love would all be phony. It wouldn't really be love in that sense. But it's not like that. It's because we all are independent with our own free will that the possibility of expressing love becomes real. The opportunity to love becomes something that's available, for everyone to grow there. So that's the idea. Yeah, love is a real thing, but not for monolithic things so much. They can just love themselves, which tends to be more self-centered. I mean, it's hard not to be self-centered if you're the only thing that exists, right? So you kind of are self-centered by default. It's not until you have other things that can tell you no that you can decide whether you're going to be nice to them or whether you're going to fight with them, and what that will create, and which works out better. If everybody's fighting everybody, what does that build? What does that create? If everybody's helping everybody, then that creates something entirely different. So that's why love is a real thing, because we have free will and we have choices, and we can choose to be about other, we can choose to be about self, and that makes love a real thing, something that we can evolve toward becoming.
Very nice. Thank you. Next question is from Ray. Now, Ray has been involved in several types of meditations, and with various degrees of success, but this particular type of Vipassana is causing her some different experiences. It is awakening in her more fears. The intensity of it is such that this is what happens in this situation. Um, if you can have both at the same time, which I guess you can, this is my dilemma: intense fear and this success of the intensity of the third eye.
If you're creating fears as well as finding success in your ability to, say, work with the paranormal, or um, create and polish and develop your intuitive side, those are good things, and you're having success there, but it's creating situations for which you are not yet quite able to deal with in a profitable way. So I would say back away from those things that create the fear. If you were ready, those things wouldn't create fear. you would be able to deal with them, in a way that had nothing to do with fear. So it happens frequently that people get in over their head, particularly if they're in the pursuit of things paranormal. They get into situations and into interactions, and it becomes negative. So you're not ready. Back up, let it go. Don't go there anymore. Try it again later after you've grown up some more and you don't have that ego and that fear that'll blossom. And those beliefs, all of those get in your way and create the problem. So don't do things that cause you fear. That's counterproductive. Even if there is a productive part of it that you're developing your intuitive side, that's nice. But develop it in a way, even if it's slower, develop it in a way that does not trigger your fear. Eventually, you grow up enough, then those things you're experiencing now won't cause fear. You'll be able to put them in their place and realize what they are, and they will not threaten you or dominate you. But until you understand that and can feel that way, leave it alone.
Thank you, Tom. I think that's good advice. I hope that helps. The next question is from Moreau, and he says that the information you have shared has helped him a lot on his path. His questions are, if we are single units of a more extensive information system, this system is both benevolent and malevolent, just like us. I experience this every day. I see the system's manipulation attempts mingling with free will and the benevolent and loving part of the system empowering free will. You've repeatedly stated that getting rid of ego is essential to evolving, but how about the system's self-destructive part that interferes? I believe the only way to evolve efficiently is to develop our own inner compass without focusing too much on the LCS, as it cannot be fully trusted. After all, it inhibits entropy from the start. Where does the entropy come from? And how did the quality of information form from the start to this point?
Okay, I would have to disagree very strongly with the idea that the larger conscious system also must be malevolent as well as good. I know there are people who have that feeling that malevolence and goodness have to come in equal measures, and that if you have the possibility for one, then you have the possibility for other. Well, as possibilities, that's probably true, but that's not actualized. That's not actualizations. That's just possibilities. The system could be malevolent, and you could be malevolent. The system could be love, and you could be love. So those possibilities are there. But the system had to grow up, just like you and I have to grow up. And it was challenged, and it had to make choices, and those choices weren't very good choices. It made poor choices, and it found out that poor choices didn't take it very far. Things got worse. They were self-destructive. So it had to try other choices. And eventually, just like us, it grew up. Well, it's been doing this a lot longer than we have. And it is, in general, less fearful than we are. I mean, it started that way. It didn't grow up in this virtual reality that scared us when we first got out of the chat room. So it didn't have those experiences. So it didn't have that fear. It had things more like arrogance. And I know the way, and I know what you should do. So now you need to do it, rather than uh, letting people exercise their free will. It tried to bully and cajole and do other things to make the process more effective. But then it realized that that didn't make it more effective. It actually made it less effective. It had to just let people evolve on their own. So it learned those lessons the hard way, just as we do. And it is very evolved. And from my interactions with it, I would say it is extremely low entropy. It does not have a malevolent side. It is good. If you see it or think you see it as being malevolent or being bad, then I think you're seeing something else. And I would welcome you to make another question about the things you see and what they might be, and would that be the LCS or is that something else? But I think you must be seeing something else, because the LCS that I know, and I've known it for a long time and interacted with it for a long time, is love, is caring, is not malevolent at all. There is no rule that says you have to have equal, bad and good. It doesn't exist that way. We're trying to evolve to where we're all good. Might not ever get to that, but we can all be much better. We can get to that. And that better will keep on getting better. We're not going to all be zero entropy, but we can all be pretty low entropy. So even pretty low entropy is pretty nice and pretty loving and pretty caring. So that works out pretty well. So I don't agree with the thesis where you started, that the larger conscious system has to have a negative side to it. It does not. We do not have to have a negative side to us. We can evolve out of our negative side entirely and have very low entropy. That's possible. Most of us do have a negative side that's fairly prominent. That's kind of typical for humanity, the way they are right now. But we're outgrowing it slowly. We're going there, and we're going to outgrow it more in the future. It's just the way it is. But it's not a symmetric thing between good and evil.
Thank you. His other question concerns visiting other realities. Do we use the same avatar we use here? Or how do we identify? Or do we even use identity when we see another reality? I had a few other reality experiences, but no memory of my identity or body. Is this the norm? And what does it say about the concept of identity within the LCS?
Yes, that is the norm. Most people don't really have a body they take along unless they're in some kind of situation where their body is necessary or called out, in which case then they create a body around themselves. But you don't travel with your avatar. Your avatar is a computed character in a virtual reality. It doesn't really exist. Okay? It's not yours. It's belongs to the computer. It's a creation of the computer. You just make its choices. So when you go out of body, typically you're just mind. You're not a body. You're just mind. You're interactive mind. And if you're interacting with other kind of physical like beings, then you have a body like they do. So you can shake their hand and kiss them on the cheek or do whatever, like you would if you were physical. But then you just do that without really looking in a mirror or seeing what you look like. What do they see? Well, you really don't know what they see. If you created a mirror there to look at, well, it could be, whatever you create there is what you'll see. It's not going to be you'll see what's really there. You will see what you create there, because you're just mind, your consciousness. You're interacting with other consciousness, and you fill in all the details that make you comfortable. So we see other beings when we go out of body, and usually they're dressed, they're not naked. That because that makes us more comfortable. It's not because they put on their clothes before they talk to us. It's just that's the way we visualize others that we interact with. We visualize with them clothed. So that's how we dress them. It's part of how we see things, our interpretation of the data. But what we're really connecting to is mind, another unit of consciousness. And what it looks like is generally irrelevant, doesn't make any difference. And because it doesn't make any difference, the system doesn't put a lot of detail in it. It's just enough to get by so you're comfortable having the conversation. There's usually not a lot of detail. Now, sometimes detail's required for what you're doing, for what for how you're interacting. In that case, there will be detail. But if it's not required, then it'll just be something you make up to make you feel comfortable with having a conversation with it. You would not be comfortable having a conversation with a three-headed chicken. What? I'm not talking to a chicken, not with three heads. That just would be disconcerting. So you don't see that. You see something that looks like you. It's got arms and legs and a head and face, and it's just sort of like everybody else you talk to. And we do that because that's what makes us comfortable. That's how we define a being. We define it that it's like us. So remember, you're not really meeting somebody else out there. You're getting a data stream. This is a single player. Now you're out of body. It's like a single player game. It's still a virtual reality. Your out of body is not the real reality. It's still a virtual reality. So you're just getting a data stream and you interpret that data. Your interpretations are just depends on you, how you want to interpret things.
What does it say about the concept of identity within the LCS?
And what it says is that that concept of identity is more of a virtual reality concept than it is of a concept of consciousness. Okay? The consciousness is something that communicates and interacts. Its identity, you don't have to know, how tall is it? How much money does it have in the bank? What sort of car does it drive? um, what were who were its parents, what kind of situation did it come from? All that's part of our identity, where we work, what we do, who we are, who our families were. It all wraps up into our identity, how we see ourselves. And that's mostly just PMR stuff. When you interact with a conscious to consciousness, you're sharing information. What's your identity in a chat room? When you're chatting with somebody? Well, it's whatever you want to make it, right? You can call yourself, Silly Sally if you want to, and that would be your name. And that's how you would interact with everybody. And you could have a picture of a cartoon girl. So that could be you, Silly Sally. That's your identity. And somebody else is, Gorgeous George, and that's his identity. And he'll give you a cartoon picture of him. It doesn't matter. We're just used to having identities and identifying people and vetting whether they're good people or not based on these identity markers that they have. But that's mostly a PMR thing, physical matter thing, a thing in the virtual reality, not so much a thing when you are interacting with a one-on-one data stream with the LCS. Now it's the interaction that's important. What does this person say? How do they feel? What are the choices you have to make when you're there with them? That's what's important. And almost all the entities you'll ever interact with in the non-physical will never tell you, oh, my name's George. Almost never does that happen. And if it does, it's probably something you're adding from your imagination, because they don't really care about identities. They don't have pedigrees. They don't have jobs. They don't have the kind of stuff that we associate with who am I? They just exist. They're a mind. They have attitudes. They have memory. They have existence, and they're willing to share that with you. But we tend to say, well, what's your name? And they kind of like, what? What's your name? What are you called? And they go, oh, yeah, call me Fred. But that doesn't mean that's their name. They're just coming up with something because that makes you feel better. Typically that's the names that you get tend to be names that are made up just to give you a name, because otherwise you're going to be stuck there because you don't know their name and it's hard for you to go on. But when you go meet that person again, you don't say, oh, I want to go see Fred. You just say, I want to see that person, and you remember that person, and you remember interacting with him. You remember that interaction, and poof, you're there. You don't need a name. It's the being is what's real. The name is irrelevant. So identity is not a big thing in the non-physical. Now, who you are and what information you know, and that's important, but that doesn't need a name. It's just an experience. And you can always go back to that experience by bringing it up. Whether you have names or not is irrelevant.
Well, thank you, Tom. You've answered a lot of interesting questions, very diverse questions. So thank you for this session.
Thank you, Donna. I and MBT Events hope you liked this video. We will continue to post videos for free on my YouTube channel, but please understand, these videos are expensive to produce. They represent many thousands of hours of production and editing, as well as all the necessary audiovisual equipment, computers, and software. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. It would be very much appreciated. The links are in the description below. Thank you.